Good morning. Hopefully you guys are having a good morning, even though it's quite chilly outside. It's a little cold, but hopefully you guys had a really good week. I definitely want to encourage you guys for this year. This year I've been trying to give everyone invitations to take with you, because they're always good to give it to others, friends, family, loved ones, those who you talk to, places you go. Could be a doctor's office, could be maybe at a store, leave it in the basket, things like that. And hopefully this year we can be able to encourage others to come and visit us. But we should always be active in that. So I'll try to keep in the back there to the left the invitations that we usually give out, especially at the flea market. So you guys will be able to take a couple or one, at least, take one that you can give out this week. Encourage someone to come visit. All right, we're in John chapter 9. John chapter 9, and verse 5 through 30. We're going to look at John chapter 9, and we'll see how far we get. John chapter 9, and we'll begin in verse 5. So, since last time, since we've kind of do a little summary here, we saw Jesus, walking with his disciples as they, passed by a blind man. A question arose of whether he had sinned or maybe his parents had sinned to cause this blindness of this man. But Jesus responds that neither is the case. Suffering is not the direct result of sin, which is truth that is taught, which we've seen even in the book of Job. And if you remember, one of Job's friends even brought that up with Job, that you must have sinned, you must have transgressed against the law or against God, and this is why you're going through suffering. This is why you're going through these things. But rather than explaining the causes for suffering, Jesus now, he turns the discussion into a purpose. He's always teaching a lesson. He's always trying to go beyond kind of what's happening. So this is an opportunity, what's happening to this blind man, this is an opportunity for God to be displayed, the works that is to be done, or to heal this man of his blindness. Now, but now we come to a situation here, or I guess you can say this study here, this case study of Jesus' claim. Because remember, in verse 5, he says, I am the light of the world, which he makes that declaration. In John chapter 9, verse 5, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So, again, he makes this declaration. And also in John chapter 8, verse 12, during the Feast of the Tabernacles, in which we kind of talked about that, and one of their things of what they did was they would take these candles and they would light them. Well, who's that ultimate light? Jesus is that ultimate light. He is that light of the world. And so, he makes that declaration. Of course, Pharisees are not even happy about that. But so, again, we're noticing here's a blind man. He is literally blind. He cannot see. Literally, he is in darkness. We have this in our mind. Jesus is providing a light. He's providing a light to this man who has lived. He's lived his entire life since he was young in darkness. In many ways, again, Jesus is teaching another lesson for those who are listening, his followers and his disciples. So let's notice here in John chapter 9, let's look at verses 6 and 7. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing. So after declaring that Jesus, again, he's the light of the world, noticing here, Jesus, he spits on the ground, he makes this substance, or this mud, he puts the mud on the eyes of this blind man. Now, again, you can imagine this is something, this is weird as can be, but that's what Jesus does. You're going to get a lot of people to notice this. But there's this great scene here, and I believe I said it once before, Jesus could have simply said, for him to see, he would have been able to see. But he doesn't do that. He does something quite different for this man. So again, rather than doing that, Jesus spits on the ground, he makes this mud, he puts the mud on the eyes of this blind man. And of course, imagine here, this man is still blind. And he tells this man to go to the pool of Siloam, to go in that water. Now again, he's still blind. This man is still blind. So he still has to make his way getting to this pool. Now, as we kind of move through this story, kind of keeping these things in our mind, at the very least, we see this faith in this blind man to go to this particular pool to wash, rather than, getting upset, or rather than wiping the mud out of his eyes or whatever. What are you doing? Why are you doing this and all that? In which we don't see that in this account here. Where this man is upset. It seems that he obeyed. It seems that he went to the pool. But now, again, the blind man, he goes, he washes, he comes back. And what's different now? You can see now. You can see. So notice that the miracle right here, it's kind of over here in verse 7, but yet the scene, or this whole situation, is going to come back up all the way until verse 41. And we're going to kind of notice that what's happening and what's the, there's a lot of things that are going to be happening once we get to 41.
Elisha did the same thing for Naaman. He had to go and action was required to prove his faith. If he had only dipped 6 times, Naaman would not have been cured of his leprosy.
No.
Full obedience. But Elisha could have touched him, but instead he sent him to the river.
So we always see those examples. It's a really good point, right? We always see those examples, even in the Old Testament, that when God told them to do something, they were required to do it. They were required to do it fully. Naaman, if Naaman decided, you know what, I'm going to do it 6 times, I think that's good enough, or 5 times, maybe even 1 time. And, would have he been healed? No, he wouldn't. Prophet told him 7 times in the Jordan River. We even think about sometimes with Nadab and Abihu when it comes to worship. If you remember the situation, Nadab and Abihu, who were they? Who were they sons of? They were the sons of Aaron. Aaron was the high priest, over the tabernacle. He was somewhat, I guess you can say, somewhat of the mediator between man, those around, camping around the tabernacle, and then of God. And God was in the tabernacle, and he was in the Holy of Holies. You got the Holies, and you got the Holy of Holies, where they had the Ark of the Covenant, and then, of course, there's the mercy seat on top of it. They would sprinkle the blood once a year. But on the outside, in the yard there, they had where they would burn the incense and things like that, different kinds of stuff like that, which I'll probably have to do it again. I went through it at Leviticus, but I did online. I might have to do it again in person. It's very interesting with all that. But anyway, Leviticus chapter 10, you'll find where Nadab and Abihu, they're commanded to take a fire. It was a sacred fire, or God had commanded them, came from heaven. They were to take that, and then they would put it, burn within the incense, and that would be this sweet savor to the Lord. But instead of doing that, Nadab and Abihu thought of, well, who knows how far it was? Who knows? I mean, sometimes with us, we can just be lazy, just reaching for the remote. But, for these individuals, they thought, well, it doesn't matter. Fire is fire, We can just grab this fire. It'll be the same thing, And so as soon as they did that, they grabbed a strange fire and they put that within that. What happened to Nadab and Abihu? They died. God struck them. Sent out a fire from heaven. They burned. And of course, Aaron was upset. People were upset. Of course, Moses was trying to tell them, no, don't be upset. They transgressed. They disobeyed. And what, you think about that, that's, you have to obey God's commands. But again, it's not like that today, thankfully. Man, imagine that. When you sin, fire from heaven, man, we see fireballs coming all the way around everywhere. That'd be scary. But thankfully, God doesn't do that. God allows us to make our choice. And it's just up to us. We have to make that choice if we're going to obey him or if we're not going to obey. And then we will have to answer in the end. Exactly. It is. And when you have this obedience, your heart has to be in it. Your whole being, your heart, mind, soul, everything has to be in it. It can't just be just going through the motions. And that was another problem. Even though after that, that was the problem with God's people. During the prophets and before Jerusalem was destroyed, they made the sacrifices. They said, well, God, we're doing all these things. We're bringing all the sacrifices. We're doing this every day. This should be pleasing to you. But God told them, your heart's not in it. Your heart's not in it. You forgot. Basically, you forgot your first love. And so that's interesting too, because even Jesus talks about that in Revelation with the churches. All right. Let's notice here verses John chapter 9 and verse 8 through 12. And now we're going to kind of get the reaction here with those that are watching, the neighbors. In John chapter 9, verse 8 through 12. The neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore said they unto him, How were thy eyes opened? And he answered and said, A man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. Then said they unto him, Where is he? And he said, I know not. So notice here, the first reaction that is recorded is those, his neighbors, those who, basically know him. And they are divided. This guy looks familiar. This guy's looking at me. He can see. Isn't this the beggar that would be begging for money? Things such as that. Maybe it's just someone that looks like him. But noticing here with the man in verse 9, he says that, I am the man, I am he. And now in face of the person saying that I'm the blind beggar who can see. Now, of course, some of the people are saying, no, you're not this individual. You must be his twin, lost long twin, or that was lost and now he's found. But they don't believe him. But they're debating over if this is the individual or not. So again, they ask, well, how are your eyes open then? How are you able to see? Now, this man, he gives his reason. He gives a simple answer. In verse 11, he says, The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said unto me, Go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. Now, there's also another proof text here that, this man didn't argue. Jesus told him, Go to the pool. Noticing here, he went. He washed, and he received his sight. But noticing here this answer, it's a pretty simple answer. But notice that the former blind man, he calls Jesus, or the former, because we went through a couple of blind men already, but the former one called him a man. But noticing here, this individual calls him Jesus. He knew who he was. But it's very interesting here because he goes, and where's Jesus? Jesus is not even there. He left, They asked, where is this man? Where is this man Jesus? And he says, well, I don't know. He's not here. So now let's notice in verse 13 through 17. Now we're going to kind of now get the reaction of the Pharisees. In verse 13 through 17, it says this. They brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind, and it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees also asked him how he received his sight, and he said unto him, He put clay upon my eyes, and I washed, and do see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. They say unto the blind man again, What sayest thou of him, that he hath opened thy eyes? And he said, He is a prophet. So the people, the crowd, those around him, his neighbors, don't quite believe him. And so they ended up taking him, let's take him to someone who supposedly knows the scriptures. Let's take him to the Pharisees. I'm sure they'll get this right. They'll figure out what's kind of going on here. So they bring him to the Pharisees. He was formerly a blind beggar. But notice in verse 14 tells us the problem here, what we're kind of going to see later on in verse 41. But notice here that it was the Sabbath day, and Jesus, that he made this mud to open his eyes. Again, making that mud was a direct violation of the Jewish traditions concerning the Sabbath. It comes back to that again. This Jesus, this man, he did this miracle on the Sabbath. This is not righteous at all. It was a violation of the law of Moses. It was a violation of their rules concerning the Sabbath. Now, once again, Jesus heals on the Sabbath. And if you remember, he did that back in, I believe it was in John chapter 5. John chapter 5. I believe it's John chapter 5. This is the beginning of John chapter 5. John chapter 5. I think it was here. Yes. Yes, it is. John chapter 5, verse 9. And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked, and on the same day was the Sabbath. So there it is, John chapter 5, verse 9. And this was the situation, the man by the pool that would stir, and Jesus heals him. Yeah, John chapter 5, verse 9. So I wasn't wrong. This time. All right, so this has happened before, and so the Pharisees, they asked the former blind man, how is he able to see? It's the same question the others give. Now, of course, the blind man, he gives the whole account again, the same story. Nothing really changes. It's the same one of what he told his neighbors, what he told his friends. But now this sign or this account causes division. Some said that Jesus cannot be from God because, he does not keep the Sabbath. And absolutely, you think about it, staggering. But he's not from God, And so noticing here, others respond, how can a man who is a sinner do such sign? Some are even saying that Jesus is a sinner because because he broke the Sabbath, in their minds, it's a violation. Others realize that he must be from God to do a miracle like this. So some call him even a prophet, that he is a prophet.
In other places, Jesus rebuked the Pharisees because there was double standard, because they themselves broke the Sabbath. But they were trying to pin something on him because he was making them feel guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kept saying, "You're doing the same thing. What's different?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of made him be quiet there. And they were upset about that. All right. So let's notice now verses 18 through 23. So they're still not satisfied. So now they're going to go to the next person. They're going to now ask questions of the parents of the beggar. So notice in verse 18 through 23. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, Is this your son, who ye say was born blind? How then doth he now see? His parents answered them and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself. These words spake his parents because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, said his parents, he is of age, ask him. So the Pharisees, they do not want to deal with the truth. They don't want to deal that this man was healed of his blindness, and it was Jesus who healed him. So they determined within themselves that, you know what? Let's just get this guy's parents. Let's see if this is really him. So they go to the parents, and again, noticing that they're basically interrogating them. And he says, Is this your son who say was born blind? How then does he now see? You think about this, you say he was born blind, but he sees now. So what do you have to say about that? How can he see? So, of course, the parents respond that their son, he was born blind, but they do not know how he sees. They don't know how his eyes were opened. But verse 22 tells us that what was wrong? What was wrong with these parents as well? There was something else in the back of their mind. They were what? They were afraid. They were fearful because of what these Pharisees would do. Those that were did not want to believe. They were feared to be, I guess you can say, excommunicated or to be put out of the synagogue. Now, in that case, maybe being banned, or in other cases, maybe even being stoned. But they were fearful of this. But rather than condemning the parents, maybe some would do that. But, you think of fear. Fear is just, you just don't know what you might do in the situation. But the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they're asking these things, and they've already said that if anyone confesses that Jesus to be the Christ, they're going to be put out of the synagogue. So again, you can already see that these people have already determined in their thoughts already. They're not even seeking truth. They're not even seeking, if this is really the truth or not. They say, well, it doesn't matter what these people say. If they do say that he is the Son of God, we already made our decision. We're just going to put them out of the synagogue. This is what we're going to do. So anyway, not only do they refuse to see Jesus or who he really is, but again, they're trying to prevent others to see who Jesus is as well. And so, that's kind of how it is. But notice what I kind of find that's really funny too, even though they are fearful, and so they're trying not to say as much, but it's very interesting that they also say that, we don't know anything. He's a man. Go tell him. He can defend himself. Go tell him. Don't ask us. Go to him. He knows. So he's not a child. He's not someone that doesn't know what he's saying. He can defend himself. All right, let's keep going here. This is still continuing. So notice here verse 24 through 34. Then again called they the man that was blind, and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said, Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. Then said they to him again, What did he to thee? How opened he thine eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore would ye hear it again? Will ye also be his disciples? Then they reviled him and said, Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spake unto Moses. As for his fellow, we know not from whence he is. The man answered and said unto them, Why herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened my eyes. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, him he heareth. And since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened his eyes of one that was born blind? If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. And they answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. I don't know about you, but that just seems like a dramatic little movie scene right there, just going back and forth. It's like a soap opera all of a sudden here, So noticing here, these Pharisees, they, from what the parents said, go talk to him. He can answer for himself. So then they placed their attention back on this man who had been healed. And they called upon him to tell the truth. Noticing here, they say, give the glory to God, or give God the praise, which is an idiom for calling someone to be truthful under oath. Say the truth. It's kind of like the same thing. I'm not sure if they still do it in the courts, but it's like, when they place the hand on the Bible, you tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And so they're saying this to him, just speak the truth, say what's real. So again, they want this man to confess the truth that Jesus is, he's a sinner, that he was not healed by him. But noticing here the boldness of this man, very bold. Notice he says, whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind and now I see. So, he tells them the truth that, I don't really know anything about this man other than, his name and other that he healed me. you know. But this is a great thing, that I guess you can say, every Christian can do. I don't. You think about others who, will try to say things and try to get you to say, just, tell the truth. Tell the truth that Jesus is not the Son of God. Tell the truth that you're not the only ones that go to heaven, or tell the truth that the things that you say or the truth that you say is not really, it's just from some made up thing, some man has just professed a long time ago, But noticing here, this individual, he was blind, but now he can see, and all he knows is that Jesus, Jesus is Jesus, and he is the Son of God. So again, the Pharisees, they asked again, well, what did Jesus do? Now, once again, he already told them what he did. But as we already know, they have these intentions that whoever did confess that he was the Son of God or confess that he was Jesus, they were going to send out of the synagogue. And we can imagine here that they're not listening at all. They're many times when individuals like this, usually they're thinking about how to rebuttal the argument, right? Sometimes when you're talking with an individual, sometimes they'll do that. So you got to be careful that you don't do that yourself, because you want to listen. You want to listen to what the individual has to say. Then you want to examine it and think about it, then respond back. But they're not doing that. They're doing their own thing. They just don't care. So noticing here in verse 27, he answered them, I told you already, you did not hear. Wherefore would ye hear it again? Will ye also be his disciples? So noticing here, he kind of says two things here that, if I'm going to say this again, are you going to pay attention? Are you going to actually listen to what I have to say? And if so, he also puts forth their, if they were genuine or not in this whole situation, if their intentions were right. Because he said, well, do you want to know these things because you want to follow him? You want to be his disciples? Is that it? Oof. And he did that, and of course, they didn't like that at all. They took that as a great offense. So the Pharisees say the blind man is a disciple of Jesus, but they're not disciples. How dare you say that? How dare you say that we're a disciple of this sinner? We're a disciple of Moses. We come from a righteous man. That's where I come from. That's who I follow. Again, I think I said it once before, when you try to talk with individuals, especially maybe those who have been in the church and are out of the church, and not quite faithful, you try to encourage them, you try to correct them. And sometimes they will say those things, don't they? Don't you know who my daddy is? Don't you know who my mama is? They'll say, my mom and daddy went to that church for 50 years. My mom and daddy started that church. They put nails and sweat in that church. I'm saved already, basically. Basically, that's what they're saying. And so these individuals here, they go back to Moses, and of course, Jesus already told them about that. We've noticed that it doesn't matter who you come from. If you're following the Father, because Moses was following the Father, they would not hate Jesus. They would not want to kill him. Daily Bible readers. Thank you.
One thing on this, it sounds like when he was born, that his eyes were closed.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, you can see that they're blind, you can see things, about their eyes, but it sounded like his eyes were closed and it been that way. And then when Christ put the spill and mud on his eyes, over his eyelids and everything,
Mm-hmm.
so that was another thing, that went along with it. I could see, everybody could see, this man, his eyes weren't even open before, now they're open.
Mm-hmm. They're open now. Mm-hmm. They did make a great emphasis on that they are open. And mm-hmm. Mhm.
believe in him and follow him. And it's three times they go to the first time they, this the man, they go to his parents, they go back to him, they throw him out of the synagogue, execute him.
Mhm. Yeah, you would think that they would do that, but they don't want to do that. I mean, but that's how it is, isn't it? In life, with individuals like this, when they're motivated by power or by greed or just by simply selfishness, it's just all about them. It doesn't matter what you show the person. If they have these intentions already in their minds, and they've already made the decision that it doesn't matter what this person shows me, I'm not going to go along with it. I'm going to do what I want to do, And the thing is, these Pharisees, I'm pretty sure they knew that Jesus was the Son of God, that this was the Messiah. I believe, if I remember right, when Nicodemus came by night to Jesus, Nicodemus knew that he was the Son of God. So if he knew, I can imagine the others knew. And so you think about that. If they truly did know, some of them, that he was the man, that he was the Messiah, and still they killed him. Still, they just didn't care. Man.
They were deceived because they worshiped their traditions.
Exactly.
That was the one thing they focused on.
Yeah. That's all. Yeah, that's really all they cared about. They cared about their traditions, which opinions, because they were just opinions added to God's law. And they didn't want to lose that. All right, let's see here. So the blind man says this, again, are you even going to listen? And he also puts forth, are you actually being genuine? Do you really want to know? Do you really want to be a follower? Of course, the Pharisees, they got upset and they turned it around and say, you know what? Ha! You are a follower. You're a follower of Jesus. And of course, they say that, well, we are a follower of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but again, Moses may have spoke to God. He may have done the things of what God has told him, but Jesus does the same thing. But you think about this situation, with Jesus, doing the will of the Father, how can Jesus not be the greatest individual ever, because no prophet has ever, I believe has never healed a blind man. I have to go back and look. I don't think there's a record of a prophet healing a blind man. Maybe Dylan can correct me, or someone else. I can't remember. I'm trying to think of. I can't. But anyway, but Jesus did. He healed this blind man, and he's far better than a prophet. He is this individual that he is a light to the world, that he's come into this world. This blind man who used to be blind, he recognizes this, before Jesus. And of course, these individuals, they just don't want to see that. They don't want to recognize that at all. And of course, they put out there that if anyone confesses that he is Jesus, then of course they will put them out. All right, so notice now verse 35 through 37. Jesus returns now. So I think that's pretty interesting here. In verse 35 through 37, seems like Jesus is coming to the rescue. And verse 35 says, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and we have found him. He said unto him, dost thou believe on the Son of God? And he answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I believe on him? And Jesus said unto him, thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. So noticing here that Jesus hears that this blind man that used to be blind, he was cast out. Because of these Pharisees, that they were upset, they were mad. So, they don't want to listen to anything, so they just got rid of him and they cast him out. But Jesus hears about this. He hears that he was cast out in verse 35. So Jesus, he finds him and he asks him if he believes in the Son of Man. And of course, he responds by wanting to know, well, who is this person that he may know or believe in him? So again, remember that this former blind man, what? Did he see Jesus? Has he seen Jesus before? No, he was blind at the time. He doesn't know what he looks like. So, noticing here, show him to me so that I can believe. Notice that, that belief was not merely acknowledgement of Jesus, but Jesus is asking if he will place his trust in the Son of Man. Make this active commitment to be his disciple. Now, this is why the former blind man says that he needs to know who he is so that he can. Now, noticing here, we think about belief. Belief. There has to be some kind of trust. Belief is trusting. Following him, seeking him, obeying him. Who is he that I can be his disciple? And who is he that I can believe? And of course, Jesus, he responds that you have seen him, and it is me, the one you are talking to. Now, in verse 38, says, Lord, I believe. Now, when he says, Lord, I believe, what did he do next? He worshiped him. As soon as he found out that this is the individual who has healed him, this is the man, his reaction is he worshiped him. I find that really, really interesting. This former blind man has moved from Jesus being just a man to being a prophet, to being the Lord who he must worship. True belief in many ways leads one to confess, leads one to take action. You think about this whole situation that, Jesus is the light to the world, and everyone in the world is blind spiritually. This man is in many ways is this, I guess you can say, this testimony that just gives this light. But of course, it's not easy to have our eyes open. Jesus did not just heal this man, but this man had to go. He had to go. He had to wash. He had to, there's this, there's this trust. There's this faith. But understanding that Jesus, he's more just a man. He was more just a prophet, but he was the Lord that must be worshipped. And he worshipped him. And you think about this, maybe to put this point forward, it's hard to break free from spiritual blindness. You think about that. You think about religious leaders are looking directly at the light of the world that they're not seeing anything. They're not seeing a thing. You think about with the Pharisees. They could see physically, but spiritually, what? They're blind, weren't they? They were blind. No matter how much the blind man wanted to see, he would never see unless Jesus came with that power of light. Sometimes, even though you come with that light, people are still not going to see. All right. We'll stop here, and we'll continue next Sunday, and I believe we will get into the last few verses that we have left in chapter 9. So read ahead, and then we'll get into that, and then I think we might get into chapter 10, John chapter 10. So thank you for your time.